Interesting timing for today. Obviously, the new ONS data came out this morning. So I guess it's probably important for us to root ourselves in the current climate. So obviously today's data showed unemployment for the 3 months of May to July to at 4.1%. So up up from 3.9% in the 3 months prior. But I think what we've seen is 16 to 24-year-olds particularly impacted. So a really concerning picture. Although unemployment probably isn't rising as much as we would necessarily expect because of the furlough scheme. So we know that the furlough scheme itself is stemming the tide, but for a period of time. So obviously at the moment it runs out at the end of October. I know there's been lots in the press over the recent days about whether that's going to be extended, but as it currently stands, at the end of next month, it comes to an end. So I think what we all expect is to see those unemployment figures, unfortunately, worsen once the scheme expires. Now, I think what we've also seen, and you guys will know this as well as anyone else because you're the people who are recruiting, jobs advertised in the market dropped significantly. So kind of looking at April's data, pretty much overnight, the market in terms of advertised jobs decreased by probably up to 50%, depending on which data you look at. And obviously registrations and applications in the market would have decreased. However, the good news is that certainly on read.co.uk in the last couple of months, we've seen those metrics significantly improve. So jobs advertised continue to go up month on month and even week on week, which is great stuff. Registrations and applications are also recovering to levels that we saw before the pandemic. So what I'm hoping that this is a picture of is certainly parts of the economy opening up, and certainly the ONS's teams who have commented on today's data certainly refer to certain parts of the employment market looking more positive than others, unsurprisingly. But obviously what we know is that applications per job are on the rise. So as a community of in-house recruiters, you guys will know this probably more acutely than anyone. So we're certainly seeing on our website applications per job rise as there are more applicants on the market. I'm sure you're experiencing. So what I hope again is there's probably insight in this session today which give you an understanding of hopefully what candidates are expecting, certainly in a much busier job seeker market, to help you find the right candidate more quickly, and I guess also to allow candidates to find you guys more quickly as well. Research, again, some of you will be familiar with how we run these. So for the last 5 years, we've run a particular similar piece of research in January. So this year we polled 2,500 respondents, got some really interesting insights back. We're just starting to package it all up early March to go to events and speak to people like yourselves. And then obviously the pandemic really struck and lockdown kicked in. So I guess we had a couple of options. One is to sort of bin that research or use it to our benefit. So what we then decided to do in July was actually complete a second piece of research, kind of doubling down to try and see actually what the changes were in people's opinions and views between January and July. So all of the respondents that we polled both in January and later in July were in full-time employment or currently looking for a job. So a really valuable and relevant audience. And I guess important to point out that this isn't read.co.uk job seekers completing a read.co.uk survey. This is anonymised data that we use a third party to help us with. So we hope it provides an unbiased snapshot of UK worker opinion and not just what read.co.uk job seekers are thinking at the moment. So I guess the things we'll cover. Firstly, we're looking at preparing for a career. So new entrants to the market, what's on their mind? What are the things they're concerning about? But also, how do they enter the employment market at the moment, and has that changed? Secondly, when people are going out to start to search for a new job, what are their behaviours? Then what do they do at the point of making an application? And probably critically, what are their expectations? And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about finding an ideal employer. So what are job seekers looking for, not just in their career ahead of them, but also the organisation that is employing them? And actually, how does the last 6 months or so's impact of the pandemic, how has that changed their viewpoints? So I guess in all of these, we'll reflect on how COVID-19 has changed behaviours. So we're obviously adding a different lens to this year to really show how things have changed during the course of the pandemic. So firstly, we'll look at entry to work. So the steps that UK workers take before starting their career. but also the impact their early choices have on their career confidence and their kind of career path. So perhaps unsurprisingly, going to university to study within higher education remains the go-to stage after people have finished college. This always indexes incredibly high, but interesting to know that nothing has actually changed negatively during the course of the pandemic. And actually what's happened is that this has actually strengthened its position at number one. So I think what's really important to be mindful of is that people, potentially this younger age group, are comfortable with a remote working environment. They're probably spending more time on FaceTime and other video calls that people of my generation are used to. But certainly it hasn't deterred them. In fact, they seem to be embracing the idea of going to university, even if it is remote, rather than being in a bricks and mortar organisation or university setting that they would have been before. So I think really important to understand that university still remains the go-to route for people once they've finished at college. Now, interestingly, straight to work now indexes as kind of the second most popular route into the market for job seekers. Now, while that hasn't changed from January to July, what actually this represents is this 28% is the highest that straight to work has ever indexed in this survey. So what I think this probably talks to is the fact that while, yes, university is the go-to, and as you've seen, it actually increased popularity between two surveys, straight to work is still a very relevant, still a very popular route into the world of work. So people potentially don't want to take on the burden of university debt, or actually they've learned skills potentially through work experience or working part-time, who knows, but they actually just want to go straight into work, learn and progress. So I think what this talks about is an interesting dynamic between those who see university as the obvious place to go, but actually others who think, do you know what, I can add real value to an employer, or actually employment can add real value to me as a person just by going straight into that route. Another thing quickly to call out here is that apprenticeships are kind of bottom of the list, as it were. 10% of people said that they would enter the career path via an apprenticeship, and 9% in July. So it's a relatively small base, but it has dropped back a little bit. But I think that probably talks to the fact that maybe there's opportunities for people who are offering apprenticeships to promote them a bit more effectively. So then we looked at kind of those who are currently in work but didn't go to university, what is their opinion? And actually 51% of respondents felt that it had impacted their career search. So I think it's really important to understand that people still see university as somewhere that they should go, but also a lot of the people who didn't go to university and move into work actually think potentially it has held them back. And here are some of the reasons why. As you'll see here, almost 1 in 5 of people saying that they regret not going to university. People think that it limited their career choices, or certainly it limited the impact of their opportunities when they're looking for a new career. People think that potentially it's restricting their chances of being promoted. So I guess a lower level of qualification. This group probably thought that if they're potentially being stacked up against people who do have university degrees behind them, maybe they look less attractive, even if they're already working within that organisation. There's definitely a consideration here about the impact that it has on their wage. And maybe the last point on here at 10%, it's affected their confidence amongst colleagues. So maybe there's a point here around people who didn't go to university feeling slightly, pushed to the side or ostracized, maybe in those conversations around what university life was like. But I think it's interesting to see that while 49% of people don't hold any regrets, a large proportion of people who didn't go to university think that maybe it's something they should have invested in. And a really interesting point, actually, talking about education. So 50% of people who responded to our surveys have said that during their professional career, they have taken a professional course to further their career. But actually, probably more importantly, or more interestingly, is that over 1 in 4 people have taken an online course during the lockdown. So these 5,000 odd people that we surveyed, the 2,500, that we surveyed in July, 27% have said actually during lockdown, what we've done is actually try to progress ourselves through an online course. Now, Read.co.uk have certainly seen that on our own courses proposition. We've seen uptake of online courses grow significantly. We've seen traffic to that part of the site grow significantly. So we've certainly seen it in our own data, but I think it's really important to understand that what lockdown and maybe people who are on furlough, maybe what they've decided to do is to use this as an opportunity to progress themselves either in their career they're in now or within the next career, or making themselves more marketable. In addition, 19% of people said they've been inspired to change career, and 5% of people, sorry, have said they've been inspired to change industry. So I think on that 5% at the bottom, change industry, maybe these are people who have volunteered to work in key worker roles. Maybe they've worked for the NHS, for example, positive, which is different to their traditional background. But again, it's important to think about the fact that people are using a global pandemic and a really difficult situation for everyone to actually think about, how can I better myself and how can I change my career path? Next up, we'll look at what people do when they're searching for a new job. So their priorities, so what motivates them. Now, 20% of the people that we polled have applied for a new job during the. So this is a very active audience. So people who responded to our poll aren't just thinking about jobs; they are actively applying for new jobs. And I think it talks to, again, a marketplace whereby the activity amongst job seekers increases. Salary still indexes highest in terms of the main motivator to look for a new job. A lot of people are curious. You'll see people want to see what's on the market, and people are still looking for a fresh start. But actually, the new entrant here are people who want to work for companies with good values. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. But people want to work for organizations who are doing the right thing, who are standing up for the right thing, who are promoting themselves as a force for good, doing good in the community or helping the wider community. And I think this is something which is a really interesting consideration. So yes, people want to get paid well. They want to pay the bills, particularly at a time whereby there is an economic squeeze. But actually, the moral aspect of it, working for organizations who do the right things, is increasingly becoming important to this demographic. Perhaps unsurprisingly, 45% of respondents are still starting their job search on sites like read.co.uk. Again, this was an anonymous poll, so this isn't just read.co.uk users, but unsurprisingly, job sites remain the go-to place for people to start their search. But obviously there are other routes. Search engines like Google, for example, almost 30% of people in July would use that route as part of their search. But really interestingly, two metrics here have increased, so professional networks and recruitment. So maybe people have used the changes over the last 6 months to obviously look for new careers, but actually to network more aggressively or proactively rather than aggressively. Maybe they're looking at thinking, well, actually, I need to change careers. So what I actively need to do is to meet more people online, whether that be rather than being in person. So maybe they're using something like LinkedIn as an opportunity to cast their net much wider, explore new career options, but also to make connections with people who can help them now or in the future. Similarly, with recruitment agencies, certainly a slightly older demographic, we saw this indexing quite high with them. But again, that's a group of people who can help people change career. They can give people career advice, and certainly a community which still has a really, really relevant part to play within the employment community. Now, again, an unsurprising statistic here that searches on mobile have increased during lockdown, but really interestingly, among 18 to 24-year-olds, 50% or over 50% of users or people who respond to the survey said they only search on mobile. So it may seem an obvious comment, but this is a really critical point for us all when we're recruiting. To make sure, for example, stuff that we will have talked about a lot before, I'm sure, at events like this. Mobile optimized sites are a must. Job ads, which render well and read well on mobile, are incredibly important. But also, this does talk to the connectivity and I guess the accessibility to this audience. Mobile is the way that they're working. They're not sat in front of desktops all day. So actually think about how we are communicating with these people, particularly at a time whereby we want to be finding the right person for that role, rather than just finding any candidate for that role, again, at a point whereby the number of applicants per role is increasing. So I guess next up in terms of that career path is when people make an application. So what are their expectations? How do they prepare? So 61% of respondents say they spend over an hour preparing their CV before making an application. So potentially this is a story of a yes, more active job seeking audience, but also one who potentially understand the competitiveness of the market out there. So we've talked for many number of years about the death of the CV. I think what this shows is that people still take CVs very seriously. They still invest time in it. And also 3 and 4 job seekers continue to tailor their application with a cover. So I think, again, at a time whereby, you know, the more savvy candidates will understand they need to stand out amongst a large crowd, they're trying to do everything they can to make sure that their application is effective, but also make themselves more marketable to you as a potential employer, but also that they're standing out against the, who knows, 10, 20, 100 other applicants for that role. And people do, you know, do interesting things at the point of applying for a job. People do still enhance the experience on their CV to maybe make them stand out. 14% of people say they sent an application by post. People do exclude information if it's going to be, they feel it's going to be held against them. People also include pictures. They enhance their educational qualifications. But I think what this talks to is probably a level of anxiety to know that actually we really want to do everything that we can to stand out, irrespective of maybe polishing my experience or polishing my CV up a little bit more than is necessary. Is something which I'm keen to do and will invest time in. And around expectations, so 80% of respondents do expect a receipt of an application. Now, I know this is going to be incredibly difficult at a time whereby, as a talent acquisition community, you're going to be receiving huge numbers of applications for some of your roles. But respondents do need to be communicated with. 40% of respondents say that they expect to receive within 24 hours of an application. So if you're using applicant tracking systems or if you're using CRM technology, really important to communicate the receipt of an application, even if it's something that says we've received your application, and if you haven't heard within X period of time, sadly you've been unsuccessful. It's important to communicate with people. 81% of people would like to be told if their application was unsuccessful. So even if it's not that automated version, please, you know, this community of job seekers are crying out to be told that they haven't been successful. And I guess these last 2 points are thinking about really high grade communications and actually high levels of expectation, almost like consumer-like expectation. If you're buying something online, you would expect a receipt to say that that order's gone through and it's being packed and sent off. Yes, we should probably think of job seekers similarly. They do expect high levels of communication from potential employers. But they also expect a relatively short timeline. So 2 weeks on from making an application, they expect to be interviewed and they expect a job offer to arrive within 2 weeks. So essentially we have a 4-week window as employers to get back to people to adhere to the expectations of this group of people. Now we know, as customers of ours and as communities that we talk to, we know that typically recruitment processes are much longer than this. But I think, again, it talks about a high level of expectation, a high level of anxiety potentially amongst job seekers, and really an opportunity as a talent acquisition community to stand out. If other people aren't communicating effectively, then you communicating effectively with that particular user or that particular pool of applicants could be the thing that helps you get to the ideal candidate first or secure them within an interview, but also make sure that they could consider coming back to you again if another opportunity presents. Now, 80% of respondents would attend a face-to-face interview if offered. So if a COVID secure environment exists, people do want to still meet people face-to-face. But really importantly, let's continue communicating them, even if it's not face-to-face. Email is the preferred choice, but let's also not forget that phone calls. Finally, on this section, a negative candidate experience can lead to a loss of business. So many of you will have seen surveys that some big recruiters have done in recent years about the impact on profitability or impact on revenue of a bad candidate. But what this community of job seekers have told us actually is that a bad experience within the hiring process can mean they're less likely to use goods or services in future. They would share negative experiences with friends and family, and actually it would stop them applying. So the quality of interaction, the quality of experience that we give users does have an impact, not just on whether they apply for another job, but actually it can have a negative impact on our business. Certainly, if they're going to tell 1, 2, 3, 10 people about their experience, that could mean up to 10 people who don't buy that service in future. So finally, about the right fit, about what attracts an audience to an employer brand. 55% of respondents say their priorities have changed when searching for their dream employer over the last 6 months. So sorry, between the period of January to July. So an increased salary is still incredibly important, but a company that treats its staff better is really rising in importance, as is working in industries where job security is better. So an increased salary, yes, they want a dream employer who pays them well and allows them to have a decent quality of life. But 35% have said they want to be working for a company that treats its staff better. And 31% where job security is better. People want to know that organisations are following government health guidelines, and also they want to work for companies that are more transparent during the crisis. So I think what this says is that the pandemic has changed what people are looking for, not just the motivations for changing jobs, but actually the things that are going to engage them within a potential employer is around communication, it's around values, it's around job security. These things have always been important, but they're probably more important now than they've ever been. So nearly half of respondents called safety and well-being at work their biggest change in priority since the lockdown. And we all know, whether it's personally or with our colleagues, that well-being is incredibly important, but it's increased in importance as we've all been stuck indoors and not seeing people as much. So people who deal with well-being and put that high on their employment agenda are seen as organisations that are really marketable and people want to work. So here you'll see staff care is incredibly important to this audience. Job security is important. Graduate training scheme potentially also talks to job security and longevity in a role, but also the way that people use their social media presence and the way that figureheads within organisations are extremely important, because people want to understand, communicate from a communication perspective. How does that organisation operate? How does it treat its people? And how does it respond during a pandemic to make sure that business is operating effectively, but also the people within that organisation are being dealt with in the way that they would want to be dealt with themselves. 1 in 4 people say it's important to work for a recognisable brand, which is the lowest share that we've ever seen for this particular metric. So yes, recognisable brands are important, but the factors that I talked about previously are actually increasing in importance above and beyond the brand or the logo of the organisation. And ethical values have seen a huge increase in importance when choosing a dream employer. So again, if you have values which are critical to your organisation, talk about them publicly. Talk about them on your website, talk about them on social media. They're the things that really, really will engage the right people. And again, at a time whereby job applications are increasing, hopefully people resonating with your values and you understanding their values will allow you to match the right candidate to your jobs more. So final point, ethical values, as you'll see here, have grown 5 percentage points between the two surveys. Positive brand image and reputation are also important. Job security and a good reputation as an employer is really, really critical. So these are all factors which are really going to allow you to engage the right job seekers at the point that they're now on the market looking for their next role. So that was a whistle-stop tour of our research. Hopefully you found that of use. Some of the key takeaways. So university is still seen as the go-to option, but also more people than ever before are going straight into work. So with the economic squeeze, yes, an increased salary does motivate people. But other factors are really, really important. Not just the way that organisations communicate, but also the way that they engage with people, the way they manage their recruitment process. But also, as you'll see on this bottom point, how people treat people is incredibly important. But also, candidates have a 4-week timeline for application to offer. And while that might be out of kilter with some of your hiring timelines, be mindful of that. Communicate with people more effectively, particularly at a time whereby job seeker anxiety is probably going to be higher than it's been for a long time with so many people on the market. And that might be the thing that helps you stand out amongst other employers as the place that that particular individual really wants to go and work in future. So, a few seconds over, apologies. But I hope
no worries, you've got plenty of time. We've actually got another 15 minutes if we want to use it.
So, I was going to say, hopefully there'll be questions, but I hope you enjoyed some of those insights. Certainly from perspective, whenever we run these sessions, we find it incredibly useful to understand what our job seeking community are saying, but ultimately giving you practical things to help you and the community, the TA and community. So Obviously, enjoy the rest of your time today, but if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
While we wait for those to come in, I've got a couple, actually. Just from a personal perspective, Simon, which of those, or could be a collection of those statistics, surprised you when you saw them?
Really good question. We had a suspicion, we were talking about this internally, we had a suspicion that the treat staff better, that sort of metric would have increased with its importance. But actually, probably the level that it increased was potentially surprising. I think what it talks to, as I mentioned, is just the importance of organisations really talking about their values. And actually, I work for an organisation, so Reed as a group of companies have values. And I think over the years, we've talked about them a lot, and then we've probably not talked about them enough. But I think certainly over probably the last 6 months, I hope what we've done is try to communicate our values internally to our people, because actually we've probably more than ever, we've seen that actually the things that we talk about within our organisation are more important than ever in terms of how we treat our staff. So it wasn't probably surprising, but maybe the degree that it increased, I think probably was really interesting for me.
I guess equally important is that you talk about the values that are different to everybody else's values, because values are often set at kind of corporate level, and they don't necessarily reflect the uniqueness of an organisation and the difference within that particular business. And every organisation is unique, and they do have differences. So finding those values that differentiate yourself from every other corporate or every other hiring company is the stuff that's really going to help you when you go out to market, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what is very interesting actually is to your point, I couldn't agree with you more that values are often set at a corporate level, and actually the people working within those organizations can feel quite disconnected from those values. But I think values have to be authentic. They can't just be a kind of sound bites or something which is, you talk about, we've got this big branding exercise. We're going to come out with new values. I think organizations who actually live and breathe them and regularly communicate them, I think are probably the organizations who do it well. And certainly, I guess for my employment history, where I've seen them work is, times whereby values have been crowdsourced, not just from, top down, but also bottom up. But also people who are actively engaging, certainly from a senior leadership perspective, actively engaging with their staff to say, well, actually, these are our values. What are we doing well? What could we do better? I think they're probably the organisations who will stand out.
Absolutely. Just out of interest, and when you share these statistics, particularly the ones towards the beginning of the presentation where you talked about expectations of candidates throughout the recruitment process, some of that I saw and I'm like, well, I kind of knew that. That people expect a response, that kind of thing. Does anybody ever react and go, oh, really? Candidates expect to hear back from us? What a surprise.
Really good question. I think when we say that to customers of ours, when we maybe sit in front of them and we talk to them about some of these statistics, or when we present, I think generally they're almost kind of, sometimes there can be a bit of an eye roll. Filter. I'm not sure too many organisations actively. Well, no, that's not fair. I think some organisations will see it and actually think, well, do you know what? Our recruitment process is what our recruitment process is.
Yeah.
I've seen examples of where we've presented this to customers and they have actively gone around reviewing their processes to think, actually, can we tighten it up? What's quite interesting, actually, is that for this particular survey, I guess the talent acquisition community might be comforted by the fact that actually job seekers are being slightly more generous in this particular round of the survey than they have. So previously, it's been a 3-week window between applying and being offered a job, whereas now it's 4. So maybe if we do this in 10 years' time, maybe it might elongate to match what actual hiring processes are.
6 months. I'm being unkind, but as an ex-TA director myself, I know some of the challenges that teams have to tackle. And again, it always comes back to communication throughout that process. You can take as long as you need to take, as long as people know why you're taking that long and what the hurdles and barriers are to take that long. It's radio silence that people hate. It's people don't expect a detailed feedback as to why they're a rejection, for example. They just want to know. They just want a no. That's fine most of the time. If they're just applying, if they're further in the process, you'd spend more time to tell them why they aren't successful. But if they've not, if they're not successful at the application stage, just telling them, that's actually a massive win.
And actually, even outside these pieces of research, we see it as a job site. We see it through feedback that we get from users of our service. That one of their biggest frustrations, probably for the 10 years that I've been working at Reed.co.uk, consistently one of the biggest frustrations that job seekers highlight is not hearing back. So irrespective of whether it's within the context of this survey or just whether that be NPS feedback that we get from people or just general comments, whether it's our customer experience team who are dealing with job seekers, it comes up time and time again that not hearing back is the thing which stresses them the most and frustrates them actually as well.
Of course. So we have had one question from an audience member, Simon, so we might as well tackle that. So sure. This is from Catherine Gallen. She says, with the 20% of people who took a course during lockdown, do you have the data broken down into those that are on furlough and those that are still working?
Really good question. We might well do. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I can certainly follow up afterwards. Sorry, so the name of the lady who asked the question?
Catherine Gallen.
Catherine, okay. Well, Catherine, you're welcome to, my email address is on the screen, so you're welcome to drop me a quick email and then maybe I will dig into the data and see what we have there.
I think it's an interesting one for discussion, if nothing else, though, isn't it, actually, Simon?
It is, yeah.
There's a difference between those people who have been furloughed and are probably maybe even thinking about training as a way to go into other industries, other roles, a new world, versus those that are currently working and are perhaps still worried about job security and are thinking about what can I do to protect my position and kind of make myself the person who's least likely to get laid off, for example, out of my team. So what can I do to increase my skill base? That would absolutely be interesting data.
It is, yeah. And I think I mentioned during the presentation our own data around courses. So what we certainly saw was a direct correlation between lockdown being implemented and the spike starting in terms of courses traffic. So you're right. Whether that's because people on furlough were using that as an opportunity to almost use the time that was available to them now, which maybe they wouldn't have had if they had been continuing actively working. That's kind of our working hypothesis. But I've just received a message from a colleague of mine that we should have that data on it, so I can.
Oh, lovely. Okay, that'd be really interesting. Yeah, if we could share that to the group, fantastic. And feel free to shoot that over to me, Simon, as well, and I'll push that over throughout LinkedIn. I think it's an interesting bit of data. Excellent. I don't have any more questions personally for you, Simon. The audience don't seem to have any either. Your data was so clear, I guess, and so black and white to a certain extent. They got what they wanted out of this session. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I say goodbye to you?
Well, no. Thank you for having me. I think is the first thing, but I think we have lots. I mean, these are obviously the headlines. We have lots of other data that we can use. I guess. So what I'd say is that if anyone who's on this call now or is listening to it on playback, if there are any questions about any of the data, want any more insights, or want to, I guess, have a conversation around how it can practically be put into effect, then just drop me a line or one of the team who I think is manning our virtual stand today. And obviously we can look into ways in which we can make it either more granular or more actionable for you.